Hey,
And
hi
go.
everybody in the world and on the phone. This is Robert from Tübingen. This is a webinar. It was just initiated yesterday by some nerds doing a lot of Twitter. It the the talk or the stuff I'm going to show you is around PMD, the static code analyzer. I ported to Apex, and there was a lot of questions around in the last time, and people asked me, hey, couldn't you tell me how to contribute? I know how to use it. I know why it's good. And then we decided to not do a 101 in Skype. We said, let's do a webinar. Let's record this. Hopefully everything will go good. So around me, there are some virtual other persons from the Ukraine, from France, from the US, from Germany, famous people that you know from Twitter. They're all listening, and they said, "Hey, Robert, I know PMD, but I want to contribute." So maybe everybody can shortly go on unmute and cheer into the microphone, so the people get a feeling that I'm not alone.
Hello, everyone. This is
Hey.
Sander from Munich.
Hi, hello everyone.
Okay, very good. Go back on mute.
There from Singapore.
From France.
Oh, great. Now that everybody has seen me, I will turn my video off so you can fully concentrate on my screen. This is about PMD. I guess everybody who's watching this video knows PMD. PMD is a static code analyzer, which means it takes source code, does some magic on it, and then outputs some issues. Because in source code you see issues. That's what people do when they do code review. They look at somebody else's spaghetti code and find out the variables have ugly names and there's a lot of problems in it. Some people out there think I did PMD or I'm a big person in this space. This is not true. What PMD is more than 15 years old. There was a guy called Tom Copeland which created it. It's a Java open source system, and it basically was written for Java, a tool to run on Java source code and then find problems in. And it was created so extensible that PMD is now open to many other languages. And 2 years ago, I worked for a Salesforce, a product company, a startup, and ISV. And we had the problem, how can we guarantee a certain code quality before our developers check in? And I thought I would need something like PMD. And yeah, then I made myself and other teammates on a journey, and we basically ported PMD to Apex. So we made a PMD language module, and there was a lot of help from others, Salesforce, who basically contributed the parser. And what I'm going to show you right now is not how to use it. I'm showing you how to write rules. And I want to start with the PMD GitHub page. There's a special page which is not for developers. It's more for the people who just want to use PMD. There is a download page. There's a documentation which basically helps people to just download the tool. The more important page is the GitHub repository of PMD. As you see here in the source tree, there are folders for many other languages: JavaScript, JSP, Java, Go, Fortran, and those are all language modules which existed long ago. And what I did, I created this PMD Apex language extension and ported many of the Java rules. Then some people at Salesforce helped me to create security rules, guys from the security team of Salesforce. And in the last year or 2 years, many tool vendors jumped on the bandwagon, and now every cool IDE is able to run PMD code inspections on Apex code on Visualforce. But the same contribution did not come from the developers. So we need more rules. Basically, all the rules that are in there right now are ported from Java or very easy rules that I made up myself. And in this talk, I want to show you what you need to do to contribute an Apex rule. And this is really not rocket science. So let's get started. I assume most people know how to contribute to GitHub repositories. You need a GitHub account, and then you fork the repository. Forking means basically copy it into your space. And so I have a fork of PMD. It's in my own user account. And then I just connected my IDE to that. So this is what you do. I heard some strange noises. Did anyone leave? No.
No, you're fine. Keep going.
I think I posted to the chat. That's what he heard.
No problem. No problem. So, get a GitHub account, fork the PMD repository, connect your IDE to this fork, and then we can get started. The IDE of my choice is Illuminated Cloud, and this is how it looks in Illuminated Cloud. It's not in the Illuminated Cloud, in IntelliJ, because PMD is written in Java. Maybe that's very important. Everybody who knows Java will be able to write PMD rules. So PMD is a quite complex Maven project. It consists of separate Maven modules for each language. So this is the package view. Just as an overview for you, there's some there is a core module, because most of the stuff that PMD does is core functionality. And then there is an extension Maven module per language. And we will just talk about the Apex module. But I suggest, I recommend, if you want to get started and want to see what rules are, look into the Java world, because in Java there are so many rules. Let me just go back to my browser. I just want to show you that's the documentation of PMD, and I think there is here in language specific Java code metrics. No, there is another page. I think I already bookmarked it. Yeah, there are tons of Java rules which also might be helpful in the Salesforce Apex world. So when I ported them, I basically took the Java code and made it run in Apex, and then I looked, does it work in this world? And in most cases it did. So if you want to get started and you don't want to start with a simple rule, maybe take a complicated Java rule and just try to port it. Okay, let's go back to my IDE. I will switch into the project view to just show you the structure. There is a source folder, and this is the only thing that is interesting to you. There is as all the Maven projects have, in main they have the source code, the production code, and in test they have the connected test. So let's go into main Java, and then here we find the lang folder, and then finally there's Apex. And this is basically the only folder structure that you need to understand. All the rest is complex Java package names, but all the meat is in here. There is a lang folder, which is for all the rules, and there is a CPD folder. which you basically can ignore, but it's good to understand it. CPD is for copy and paste detector. PMD contains a separate tool which is not connected to rules and stuff like that, which can compare files with each other and find stuff that looks very similar. So you can read it up in the documentation. It's not connected to how PMD runs with rules, but CPD is interesting and it works for Apex. So you can basically give him all the code of your interns and find out if they just stole code from someone else, and find out if you have a redundancy in the code. Okay, but let's go back into the lang folder. In the lang folder, there is the AST folder, and this is really core for understanding rules in, or PMD in general. There are different ways you can analyze and find problems in programs. There are tools like check marks. I guess every Salesforce developer knows check marks. It's a dynamic code analyzer. It basically runs the code, and then while it's running, it's looking how it works. A static code analyzer doesn't have any runtime behavior, so it just looks at the source files. And how do you look at source files? Basically like a compiler. And a compiler works in a way, it takes a text file that you have written, it takes out the irrelevant stuff and finds the chunks that are in there, and then it matches those to a grammar, which basically says, after a German noun, you have to have a verb, how is it in English? Yeah, it's like a grammar. And all the allowed words in a language, they correspond to a so-called AST node. AST stands for, this is the only university part in my recording right now, but you have to understand that. When it reads a source file into the system, it basically recognizes stuff like braces or method names, and all of those text chunks can have a certain type, and you can take a source file and create basically a tree out of it. A tree, so for example, you have a method, then you have a method subtree which you can expand, and in this subtree, you have different statements and expressions. So what PMD does when you give it a file or a bunch of files, it runs the how is it called? I know it's not a compiler, but it's a parser, and then it provides you a tree which you can iterate over. But all of those subtle things of compilers, you don't have to understand them. You just have to understand that a source file is converted into a tree, and each node of this tree is of a certain type. And this tree is called abstract syntax tree. I don't know why it's abstract, but it models the syntax of a file, and it's the form of a tree. So there's a parent node with child nodes. Yeah, and those are the AST nodes that exist in the Apex language. And this is not something I came up with. This is really the Apex parser from the Salesforce guys around Josh Kaplan. And yeah, so you don't have to understand them. You don't even have to open those classes. But this is what you have. So when you think I want a rule which finds out if the comments are really cool, I just tell you there is not even an AST node for comments. So just get rid of that idea in your head. We have to live with what Salesforce provides us. Okay. I will later talk more about the AST. Metrics multifile, just ignore it. Go into rule. And the rule folder, the rule package contains the rules that exist for Apex right now. they are grouped into categories. For example, there are design rules which tell you not to make big classes, not to make too many public methods. There's one thing which I like really most because it tells you if your code is really good covered with tests. It's called cyclomatic complexity. It really sounds like a PhD thesis, but it's basically counting the different ways to the code. And so I would say this is the most complex rule to understand, so don't start with that. But there are also very easy ones, like avoid hard coding IDs. And maybe we just look at this specific rule. It's a Java file. It has less than 30 real lines. And it's basically defining how does a Salesforce ID look like. This is something very specific to this rule. But important are those visit methods. So if you want to understand how PMD works, you have to check your patterns books, and there is a pattern called the visitor pattern. It's basically a pattern to solve the problem. How do you separate how you traverse a tree in a program, and how do you process those tree nodes? And this basically says, okay, I don't care about anything else in a Apex files, but when you visit a node of type literal expression, this is not a very good one, but there are AST nodes which are called method block. This is more understandable. If you meet a method on your way through the code, stop and run what comes next. And this is basically what's in this rule. What's in this simple rule? It's stopping. It's checking. Is it a string? And if it's a string, does it match the hard-coded ID rule? Then just add a violation. And this is how all other rules basically work. Let me find another one. Security rule. Apex CRUD violation rule, a really complicated one, which is checking, are you really checking if you can update a certain field when you do a DML? There's a ton of stuff, but when you look in the body of the rule, it's just visiting nodes in this abstract syntax tree. If it finds a DML statement, then check for CRUD. If it's a DML delete statement, look if it's deletable. So what it's doing, it's basically telling you, I'm interested in those specific parts, and when you visit those parts, let me check something. And then you do your tests, and then you add a violation, and PMD does the rest. So just a short question into the live audience. Am I too fast or too detailed? Any feedback?
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think you're doing just fine.
Yeah, I was good. Very
good. So we will also have time for questions in the end. So this is one part. But before I dig deeper, I want to leave code and show you a tool that helps you in connecting all those bits and pieces. There's something called the designer, which is part of PMD, and it helps you understand for a given source file, which AST nodes do I have? So just take your IDE or do it on the command line, and in Java call this class. It's called designer in a package PMD utils fx designer. And when you run it, it opens a small tool where you can do exactly that. It takes a while, just to start. But I think after that, everything will be quite clear. So this is the PMD rule designer. It works for every language. There's a select box here, and you basically switch to Apex 35. It will always be 35. So PMD doesn't take care about different, we don't update to the latest compiler all the time. So this might be a thing. So, and then maybe I just remove this code. I think this is a Java class, but when I click refresh AST, it does what I told you. It's parsing that source code, and it's presenting you on the right side the abstract syntax tree. And when you collapse and collide everything, you see why it's called a tree. So at the root node, it's a user class. It has inside a nested method, and it has a few other methods that you don't see. Just don't care about them. This CL in it is basically a hidden default constructor that you can't see. Same with clone. Let's just look at this simple method. It's a method node, and on the left side you see nodes can have attributes. This rule designer is not showing all attributes that exist. It's just showing some of them, but for example, it tells you when does this method, where does it begin, in which line, is it abstract? So when I make this, I don't know, a public void nested method, I think it will add some attributes here, but it knows that. It knows that. So just think about, you want to write a rule, you want to detect a certain problem, just paste in the problematic file here and look at the AST, and then you get a feeling, okay, what do I have? Which information does the Salesforce parser give me? And then you can work in code and extend that. The rule designer is also the perfect place for even simpler rules. You have two options in PMD. You can write Java-based rules for the complex stuff, and you can write so-called XPath rules, because this abstract syntax tree will also be available as XML structure. And you know, XPath is a way to navigate XML structures. So maybe I can just shortly show you that. I didn't well prepare that, but let me just look for an XPath rule in the system. A very easy one. There are not that many easy rules. Oh, that's not even Apex. So let me go out. So yeah, where do we find the XPath rules? I showed you where Java-based rules are located, but I also have to show you where the XPath rules are. There's a different folder. It's called resources, because XPath rules are in XML, and it's basically in the rule set files themselves. You know, the rule sets define which rules are available. Let me just open a rule set. A rule set is an XML structure which is saying we have different rules. There are some rule definitions which point to a specific class. There are others which have, like this XPath rule, an XPath expression, which is basically the full rule. This is saying when you find an array load expression and within it a trigger variable expression, then we have found a problem. And whenever you create a rule, you also have to decide in which rule set should it go. Is it a code style rule? Is it an error-prone problem? Is it a security issue? And then create such a snippet. And if it's an XPath rule, you can basically put in everything here. You don't need to write any source code, any Java code. Or like with the one that I showed you in Java right now, the avoid hard coding ID, you have to give it the class name of the Java rule. For every rule, you have to give it a small description, which will auto-populate the website description of the rule. There should be an example showing this problematic code. And yes, good. Let's just go back to such a rule. So how do you get started? To get started, you don't need to play around in the command line. You don't need to upload it. You can really just get your PMD fork into your IDE and work with tests. Because PMD has a perfect way to test rules without ever hitting the command line. You don't even have to give it code in the command line. You can do everything in your IDE. And I will show you where you find that. There was this main folder. There's also this test folder. And for each category, there is a JUnit rule, but it's basically empty. It's basically just referencing an XML, and in the XML there is the whole definition of a rule test. So let's just go there. Let's just no, that was not the right thing. Apex lang rule. Coding style. Let's just go into avoid hard coding ID. So instead of writing unit tests in Java, you basically just populate an XML document. So let me just show you a single test of the avoid hard coding ID rules. You see, there are those. I know it's a little bit ugly from the formatting, but I think you get the point. So this is test data. Just ignore what's on the top. There is test code. We are testing the avoid hard coding ID. And what are we testing here? We just put it in the description. Then we say the code that follows should produce one PMD problem. And then we have code. You see there is a public class foo, and indeed here there is a Salesforce ID. And that's it. And then you have many more of those test examples. So when you create a new rule, a new Java rule, what you need to do is create a rule Java file. You need to add it to a rule set to make it available to PMD, and then you need to provide some sensible test cases in this XML. And then when you have it, you basically go into the container JUnit test class of that category and run it. So let me just run that file. So I'm just running the code style tests, and it takes a while, and then you see. So it's basically, you see the code style, there are many tests, and they all work perfectly. So maybe we should come to the, okay, maybe just what happens then? When you find really good that you have a rule that is running on your system, you should always also download some bigger Salesforce repositories from GitHub and try it on their code. But when you have that, how do you get it back? How do you even make it available to the guys who maintain PMD? So let me just, in the last 5 minutes before we do some Q&A, go back into my browser. PMD is a very active repository, but there are 3 guys that you should know the names of. I'm not a PMD maintainer, so whenever I do anything, when I fix anything, I have to do the same that I'm telling you to do. But just keep those 3 names in mind. There's this guy from Munich, Andreas Dange. I think he's doing PMD for, I feels like the last 5 years. There's this guy Juan from, I think from Argentina, yeah, and this French guy Clément, and they basically they make it fly. They just care about the core of PMD, but if you want them to accept something, you have to please them. So, and how do you please them? Yeah, they are great. So you don't have to please them. They love the Salesforce extension of PMD. So what you then do, you basically open an issue in the real PMD, not in your fork. You open a new issue and basically say, I want to add a new Apex rule. Can you assign this issue to me? And then they say, yeah, did you think about that? And then you basically, you are in. So that's all you need to do, even if you don't contribute. Maybe you just find a problem. PMD is mentioning an issue which is not. So maybe it's just a bug. Just open an issue, say, hey, I'm John from the US. I want to contribute to PMD, and there is no formal acceptance. They will just basically tell you, hey, that's cool. I opened this issue that you will fix that bug or add this new rule, and then everything's good. And then what you do, you basically take your fork, you commit and push into your fork, and then you basically say, I make a pull request, please merge it in. And then you connect it to the issue you just opened so they know what you are really contributing. And that's it. So it's open source. They don't quality test. They will not download any Salesforce repository and run your stuff on it. PMD has millions of tests, and they will not accept any pull request if you don't provide decent tests. But if your tests run, that's perfectly fine. They will always also contact me, because I'm like the middleman between the Salesforce ecosystem. But there's not a lot of formal things that you have to keep in mind. Just make something work on your local system, and then create a pull request, and then we talk, and then it's in. So good. I think that's it. Maybe we should.
Thank you, Robert. There are a few questions in the chat. Could you have a look at them, please?
Sure. Let me see. Where is the chat? So yeah. Oh yeah. We require.
Actually, we should probably prompt Robert with the questions from the chat, just so he can focus on the answers.
No worries. So one of those is basically, how would we start up a new language? So let's say we want to analyze metadata that we push to our organizations and want to have all metadata have help text and descriptions. Or we want to start to have rules for Lightning component development, which is somewhere in between JavaScript and Lightning components. So how would we go down that path?
Is this you, Sandro?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I would recommend not to start with that, because adding a new language is a bigger thing. You would have to find, because you first have to find a parser. how do you parse Lightning code or metadata, and then immediately the question will come up, we already have a JavaScript PMD language module or an XML language module. So I would say you can do it and you should do it, and I would love to see you do it, but my real recommendation is do it after you created a few Java-based rules for Apex.
Fair enough, thank you.
Yeah, but you definitely can do it. And maybe just one anecdote. When I presented PMD on last Dreamforce, and immediately after that I was at a party in Berkeley. It was not connected to Salesforce, and at this party I met a guy from Salesforce working at the security team, and they said, yeah, Checkmarks is good but very expensive, and they immediately jumped in and said, we will provide rules for the security audit, and many of the rules that are for security, they need to know what's going on in Visualforce. And I said, oh, this might be hard, and it took him a weekend to make a language module for Visualforce. And Visualforce it's not HTML, it's not JSP. So Sandor, it's absolutely feasible to add language modules, and I think that's a very good idea. But maybe start getting feel comfortable in this whole arena of creating pull requests and what those guys ask. Okay, good. So what else? I see a question from Daniel. Do we have to fill out all those XML stuff for rules? Yes, you do. When people ask me about PMD on Twitter, and even those great IDE people from the Welcome Suite or Scott from Illuminated Cloud, they always ask me about which rule set. The rule set not only defines which rules exist, it also tells you if we have an issue, is it a big issue, or what should we do? And PMD always comes with a default rule set. And yes, you as a rule designer have to find some decent defaults for your rule. You have to describe why it's needed. You have to give some clues about problematic code, because the PMD maintainers, when they make a release, they also update their documentation site. So everything you come up with also needs to have some documentation aspects. So you definitely need to do that.
I have a question. So just out of the given lead I have,
just say your name. Just say.
Oh, Stefan. Sorry.
Hi, Stefan.
I just looking at the what's the nice rule, excessive length rule, which is my first candidate I want to port to Visualforce, and there is two things which I wonder. So one is there is obviously Node has a few interesting parameters like get begin line and get end line, but then there is a data point in there. So the class doesn't raise an error, but it adds a data point. What is that?
Can you point me to the rule? I don't know where it is.
It's the design excessive length rule in Apex.
Ah, yeah, right. Yes, there are. And to be honest, when I ported from Java to Apex, I often just simply used what was there in Java. But the rules have different base classes, and there are those statistical rules. So you basically have to look into those abstract base classes, how they work. This guy from France, Clément, he recently added to PMD a metrics framework. So instead of every rule is doing its own stuff, counting columns and whatever, he basically gave PMD a framework for collecting all of this stuff. And those data points, I think they are part of the metrics framework. So this is something you really have to dig in and connect to the people. You can always, if you say you want that, mention me, I will pull him in. But right now at this point, I have no clue what a data point is. But I guess a data point is just for collecting stuff. And at a different place, I guess in the abstract base class, maybe there you have a code snippet which says, okay, what's the threshold of this specific metric? When I'm collecting data points and I come above this threshold, I fire the violation. So sometimes you don't see the add violation in the rule itself, you find it in the base class.
Okay, awesome.
This is sufficient. Yeah. Okay.
Which leads to an interesting second question is, I think we are faced, when I look at the challenge of getting Visualforce rules, is one part is writing them, but I think the more interesting part is defining what are things we want to watch out. What would your suggestion be to collect it? Because eventually people who know what to watch out for in Visualforce might not necessarily be the people who then implement them.
Yeah, I think this is not a good answer, but when I see people on Twitter asking for rules, I basically think, hey, this is open source. If you don't write it, it will never exist until sun and earth collide. So, so the person who needs a rule will be the person who writes it. And when it comes to Visualforce, I guess even the parser that the guys from Salesforce have written is really very basic. So maybe someone would have to create AST nodes for it.
No,
did I get your point?
I wouldn't mind writing a few rules. Like say, I'm coming from a Java and a Node background, so my Visualforce is still a little bit rudimentary, and I have no intention to make it strong because I rather live in a Lightning world, because it's much more painful. I'm a masochist. But like say, if somebody says, "Hey, look, these are the 10 things I want to watch out for," I actually might be inclined to say, "Okay, for the sake of learning, I'm going to implement that." So,
sure.
What would be good place should we go and put the rule ideas directly in the PMD repository, or should we start with
No, that's you can do that. I told you not to put agenda in there because they don't care about what's going in our mind. That's what you need to understand. The issues. I hear a clicking noise. Who's that? Okay, it's gone. So this is a huge open source project, and they don't want to watch us thinking. So if you put an issue in there, it should be of the kind, I will work on that. Could you please just assign this to me so I can discuss with people? So when you think there would be, you have a good rule idea, you can create an issue there and then basically pull everybody, me and the others in the talk, just in there. But there are no people in the PMD universe who can really give you answers. There's not an expert anymore for those Visualforce rules. This guy who wrote all the Visualforce rules, he left Salesforce. He's now working for Apple. So do you get my point?
So I was wondering, one of the things what we could do is like say we pester Rene to go on a discovery tour and come up with a set of rules that should be implemented, and then we can I would like to know what rule ideas you have, you as in everybody listening to this talk, and then we can arrange. Okay, not that we end up 10 people start writing rules, and then we realize that 5 of us wrote the same one.
Yeah, but actually, this is a luxury thought, because from my experience since I did that, everybody was interested and told me, yeah, I will look into it, and then nobody contributed. So I would rather like to live in a world where you and Sandor and Christian are writing the same rule, and we can just combine them. And so this will not happen. This will not happen. And we have many channels to just discuss that. We can just make a Twitter vote or whatever. Yeah.
I think that was
so
my point.
Let me just go back to the question. Okay, who else has questions? Can maybe just John, I see a long question. Maybe you can.
So I had a quick question. You had mentioned that there's one rule where it examines the code for hard-coded record IDs. And in general, yes, that's a wonderful thing. We should not be hard-coding IDs. But especially if we go beyond Apex code, and if we are able to branch out into larger things like, say, workflows or something like that, for example, there are some times when there are hard-coded IDs of the org ID.
Sure.
So those are valid instances where an ID should be in the metadata code. How do you craft a rule that does a general review of the code, but it also manages exceptions to the rule? How do you deal with exceptions to the rule?
I mean, a rule is just code, and code can fire a rocket to the moon. It can be
but I mean,
the world. So the rule just have. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So it's in the rule. If you want to allow certain kinds of hard-coded IDs, for example, if it's a private test class, if it's a test class, such IDs are okay. You basically, while traversing this abstract syntax tree, you look for clues if this is such an exception. So with code, like let me look. If I have a code style, there are certain rules where I'm not sure if I can find one. Performance, avoid socle in loop. Yeah, like avoid socle in loops. I'm in the wrong folder. I mean, socle is okay, but not in loops. So this is such an exception. Let me just still in the wrong folder. It's really a deep package tree. It's like the opposite of Apex org. You have no packages, all 200 files in one folder, and here it's basically more folders than files. So what did I say about socle in loops? Yeah, socle in loops. So how many AST visit methods do we have? A socle expression. But do we dislike socle expressions? No, only if they are in loops. And then basically this is the exception. If inside loop node or parent does not return or not for each. And then I have small extra methods which basically find out, am I in a loop? And I should not check my immediate parents. I should also look for grandfathers. And this is why we have this while here. And
That's it. All right.
Good?
Yes.
Good. Who else? France, Ukraine, Germany, Christian.
Don't have any question. I think it's we need to try it a little bit to really understand how writing rule works, and maybe we'll come back later with question. But so far, it's
sure.
Everything is new, so.
Christian,
I agree.
are you sitting in the same room? No.
Say again, sorry?
Are you sitting in the same location? No.
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 Sander is not in the same office right now, and Fabienne, I think he's in Paris, right?
Yeah, okay. It was just showing me that you both are speaking. Okay.
Yeah, so for me, it would be interesting how you get the Salesforce guy writing already a Lightning linter, so they're parsing already your code, or at least the JavaScript part of the code. How you get the Lightning team to contribute an AST for Lightning components?
I'm quite sure they will not. I need to go here because my battery is low. I just look at my teammate. Tom, is it okay for you if I? Okay, good. Yeah, I just switched my video back on. So I'm not sure they will. They didn't even build something special for Apex. While under the shower, I had the idea, why should I write my own parser when there's the Force IDE, and inside the Force IDE there must be some kind of parser because it knows the methods and stuff. So we basically asked them, can we use it? And they helped me to understand it. But when it comes to Lightning, I would rather doubt it, because I think for untyped languages like JavaScript, linters might be the better tool. Because, yeah, do you get my point, Christian?
Definitely. I mean,
I'm not even sure if linters work the same way. If they really, I can't answer that.
I'm not sure, because I knew that PMD was also.
You are famous enough to ask them.
Yeah, we'll see if I get someone who gets the commitment. But because I knew that PMD was also ported to Flex once a day, and when I'm not completely wrong, they had a also parser for the MXML markup, which is very similar. I mean, Adobe Flex now in the early days have been very similar to what Lightning Component is nowadays. So you have a markup part, and you have a logical part within script language. Sorry? Oh, I think Robert is gone.
No, I couldn't hear you for the last minute or so.
Okay.
Did you get my answer?
Yeah. You thought about that linting would be the better option for kind of untyped languages as.
Yeah. I don't know much how linting works, but the fact that there's this strange and different word, linting versus static code analysis, I think in an untyped world, code analysis might be different. So I don't know, but
maybe I can chip in a little bit there. So when you look at what Salesforce is doing, is there won't be in Salesforce IDE version 2. So there was a beta, but that has been abandoned. Moving forward, they currently bet a little bit on Visual Studio Code. And the main reason for it that Visual Studio Code talks with the backend using the language server protocol. And that's something that came out of Microsoft research. And our star IDEs like Illuminated Cloud or the Welkin Suite, they are free to use the same language server API protocol to talk to the piece that Salesforce has provided. To then run through the language, it creates it's a little bit, instead of having a static AST file, it's more a dynamic one. So the editor or the analyzer calls the language server and says, "Hey, I got a piece of code," and the language server comes back with all sorts of information. Okay. So but the tendency, what I see in Salesforce is that anything front end, editor, IDE, testing, linting is all around JavaScript. So they're not keen on extending Java into the front end world anymore. It's confined to the platform itself. So moving forward, what we can actually sit back and watch until somebody has an itch because this language server is for .NET, it's for Java, it's for Go or whatever, until somebody goes and writes a module for PMD to be able to talk to a language server, and then we can piggyback on that.
We thought, funny that you saw that. There was a long discussion. That was my plan, and we had an ongoing discussion. We are right now using the parser, which is part of the language server. Like a few months before, we used the force.com IDE jar, and now we are using a different jar because this is updated whenever the language is updated. But PMD and also the PMD maintainers, they said we never want our tool to need an online connection to connect to some magic server. So this is where PMD will not be available. So the PMD maintainers will always say no to something like that. It should always be a local command line tool, and there should not be tight coupling to such a language server. So my gut. Yeah.
Language server is actually not something that's online. That's a process that runs on your machine.
Okay. Yeah. But we should find out. I think Salesforce doesn't care much about those old languages like Apex and Visualforce, so they will provide good tools when it comes to Lightning, but when it's about Apex, we have to find our own tools. So Daniel asks about suppress warnings. Can you just...
No, I just thought this was the answer to John's question. Like, how do you make exceptions to rules that?
Oh yeah. Now I get.
And you
also
from the latest Apex compiler, you can use the suppress warnings annotation to send messages to PMD, what to suppress and what not. Yeah. That's what I was about to point out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was. It wasn't just Salesforce allowing this annotation. It was long half-year discussions if they can introduce this. So it took me a while to convince them to allow suppress warnings.
Oh, this is amazing, actually. So that's an amazing achievement. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
it's really helpful to use it. And the Apex compiler would just reject it in the past.
Really in the past you could. In the past, you could add any annotation, like, I don't know, Oktoberfest would work. You could save an Apex file, and then I just made rule suppression work with that, and then a really high person contacted me and said, you break our new compiler. If you leave that in, we cannot roll out the new compiler. Would you be so kind and remove that from PMD? I was close to asking, okay, how much money do you give me? But then I did it, and after I think half a year, they said, we will build it back in. You can now use it. So, so what other questions do we have? Maybe we can. Is there anything? I'm also thinking about maybe we should stop the recording and talk. I don't know.
Yeah, I got one question for the recording, and that is: are you going to write up a blog about this as well? This will be posted to the community.
Yes, I'm not going to write a blog post because I don't want to write. I will commit some talks to Dreamforce if my boss pays the flight, but I don't want to write about. I'm not a blogger.
Yep.
But I hope that we will. No, that's why, John, you are recording this. I want this. Yeah. I want to share this, and I'm also. It's not about time. I love if people call me and say, I need you to help me write this rule, and I do it, and I did it in the past, but I just don't want to write. I don't know. I'm a talker.
No, I hear you. No, I just thought I'd ask. All right, with that, we're going to stop the recording.
Oh, there were too many people talking.
Yeah, so I'm going to say let's stop the recording now, and I just want to say, Robert, thank you for doing all this. And
sure.
I've certainly learned a lot. So, all righty.
Great. We will have